Mr. Baez?
A clarification on the court's last ruling. Is the court precluding me from mentioning the items that were the issues? Well, let me rephrase that. The evidence that was admitted at trial.
I'm not telling you can't argue. You can't argue to utilize it to say that Mr. Anthony or Mr. Lee Anthony sexually abused Miss Anthony.
Just wanted to clarify that because there are other arguments that could be made that don't relate to abuse, and I wanted to make sure I could still do that, such as family dysfunction and things like that. I just wanted to make sure.
As long as you don't jump out and use that to support the argument that she was sexually abused by her father and her brother.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure.
Yes, sir. All right, both sides ready to proceed. Let's return to jury. State recognized presence of jury.
Yes, sir.
Defense.
Yes, sir, we do.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Did you heed all of my previous admonitions? Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Dr. William Rodriguez was called as a witness by the defense. Through no fault of the defense or the state of Florida, Dr. Rodriguez was not able to complete his testimony. Therefore, you are to disregard his testimony and not consider it in your deliberations. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, both the state and the defense have now rested their case. Their attorneys now will present their final arguments. Please remember that what the attorneys say is not evidence or your instructions on the law. However, do listen closely to their arguments. They are intended to aid you in understanding the case. Each side will have equal time, but the state is entitled to divide this time between an opening argument and a rebuttal argument after the defense has spoken. The state may proceed.
Thank you, sir. Good morning. I want to be the first, and I know I will not be the last, to thank you for the time that you've given us in this case. We've taken you away from your families, from your lives for the last 6 weeks, and all of us appreciate the sacrifice that you've made. I am happy to say that we came in on the low end of our estimate. We said 6 to 8, and it's been 6. And our job here is virtually done, and your work is about to start. It's easy to be a parent sometimes. It's easy to be a parent when you're playing with your children. It's easy to be a parent when children are a joy and when children are fun. But we all know that being a parent is so much more than just playing with your children. Being a parent is about sacrifice. Being a parent is about sacrificing your time, about sacrificing your love, and about sacrificing your dreams and sacrificing your life. When you have a child, that child becomes your life. This case is about the clash between that responsibility and the expectations that go with it and the life that Caylee Anthony wanted to have. When Caylee was born, Caylee was saddled with expectations and responsibilities. Those expectations came not only from society, but from her parents. The expectation is that she would care for her daughter with the support of her parents, that she would work hard and help support her daughter. Her response to those new responsibilities, as the evidence has shown in this case, was to lie. The first expectation of her parents, shortly after Caylee's birth, was that she would work, that she would help support her daughter, along with the generous contributions of her parents. For whatever reason, her solution was to lie. She told her parents initially that she went back to the same job that she'd had before Caylee was born, working at Universal Studios for a subsidiary company, taking photographs, a daytime job. And her parents accepted that. They believed that. They both worked during the day, and it appeared that that's what she was doing. The significance of what I'm about to tell you isn't simply that Caylee Anthony lies. It's the pattern and the reason that she lies that is important in this case. Because what you'll see in what I'm going to tell you and what you've heard in this case is that when Caylee is faced with a problem, her solution is to change her lie, to modify it. Caylee is very bright. You can't take any of that away from her. She's very smart, and her lies are very detailed. But what you find throughout this case is this persistent pattern. When Caylee wants to do what Caylee wants to do, Caylee finds a way. So at first she tells her parents, I'm working. I'm working during the day at Universal Studios. That sounds fine. It sounds very plausible. But the problem is that when you're working and you have a child, someone has to take care of the child. So the obvious question is, who's taking care of Caylee? The solution? To make up a lie. So Caylee makes up Zanny. So for almost 2 years, Caylee Anthony pretends to have a job and pretends to have a nanny to take care of Caylee while she's at work. And everything seems fine. But that creates a problem. The problem is that Caylee's with Caylee 24/7. She's with Caylee every day and every night. Because when her parents think she's at work, she's not. She's with Caylee. And what kind of life is that? So Caylee solves the problem. The solution is a new job. A job as an event coordinator. A job with flexible hours. A job where sometimes she has to work at night. Perfect solution. If she wants to go out at night, if she wants to hang out with her friends, if she wants to see her boyfriend, she simply says, I have to work, and drops Caylee off with her mother. And her mother is happy to help, happy to watch Caylee. And that works for a while. Works well for a while. Everything is good. Caylee can do what she wants, have the life that she wants, have the support of her parents, have Caylee when it's fun, and when it's not, she can leave Caylee with her mom. Everything works great. But then she meets Ricardo Morales, somebody that she feels she may actually have a relationship with, who accepts Caylee as part of that relationship. But that creates a problem. How do you include Caylee in the relationship without letting mom know that the whole thing is a lie? So you create a new solution. Oh, Zanny will take her overnight. We spend the night there. So in the spring of 2008, 3 or 4 nights a week, Casey and Caylee stay at Zanny's. Another creation in this case. When in fact, they're staying at Ricardo's house. It works perfectly. It's great. Mom and Dad think that I'm working late, and so Caylee is with Zanny, and it makes perfect sense for me to spend the night, and I can spend the night instead with my boyfriend. It works perfectly. It's great. But Ricardo decides that he really doesn't want a serious relationship. So this playing house isn't working anymore. Then we get into April and May of 2008, and this is where the problem starts, because the solutions of the lies are no longer giving Casey what she wants. It's not giving her the freedom that she wants. Remember from the testimony of Amy Huizenga, her friend, the friend of Ricardo and friend of hers, that friend through that period of April, May, and June of 2008, that Cindy is resisting. The excuse isn't working anymore. Cindy isn't allowing Casey to go out and do what she wants and babysit Caylee. There's a tension there. The freedom that Casey wants just isn't there anymore, and she can't come up with a story to make it happen. But that's what she wants. Her parents are getting suspicious. Remember the story from Mr. Anthony about the Sports Authority job? That's in early 2008. George is getting suspicious. And George is trying to find out what's really going on. But George is being told to stay out of it. If you'll read George's suicide letter, it actually says in there, at one point, I think on the 3rd page, he says, I've tried for months, in fact, over a year, and I was told to stop being negative. George is trying to get beneath the layer of lies, at least as to the Sports Authority issue, but he's being told to stay out of it. Stop being negative. And Casey's lies continue. But there's a problem. The only way Casey's lies work is if Caylee isn't talking. Caylee's 2.5, almost 3. She's starting to become verbal. She's starting to talk. Caylee is not going to cooperate. She can't. She doesn't know enough to lie. At some point, Caylee is going to say something. Someone's going to ask her about Zanny, and she's going to say, who? Someone to ask her, did you have a good time at Zanny's? And she's going to say, no, Tony. It just can't keep going. Casey meets Tony. Tony has this life. He's free. He's a club promoter. He's out there at night with the loud music and dancing, and it's a great free life. With Tony, she can do whatever she wants. I believe the testimony was on June the 6th, and on June the 13th, they have the nightclub Fusion, and it's fantastic. Shot girls, music, dancing, young people doing what young people are supposed to do. And I want to say that clearly. There's nothing wrong with young people being young people. There's nothing with young people drinking and dancing and having fun. There's nothing wrong with that. But that's not the life that Casey has, because Casey is a mom. And that gives her responsibility, whether she likes it or not. but that life is so much what she wants. During the week of June 2nd through June 9th, in fact, Casey has a chance to truly embrace that life because Cindy was on vacation that whole week and spent most of it with Caylee. Remember, she talked about how wonderful it was spending that week with her granddaughter. So that whole week, Casey is essentially free. She has a taste of that freedom. She doesn't have to lie to get around it. She's free. And it is fantastic. So she has a choice. A life tethered to a child, or a life free to be 22. You might ask yourselves, well, why not just leave Caylee with Cindy? Why not just give Cindy custody and walk away? Because based on the evidence you've heard in this case, Cindy would never permit Casey to walk away from Caylee. Cindy wanted her daughter to be a mom and to act like a mom. And there is no way that Cindy Anthony would have ever permitted Casey to walk away. So those were Casey's choices. The life that she wanted or the life that she had. And as hard as it is for anyone to imagine, she had to choose between sacrificing two things. The first was her dreams and the life she wanted. And the second was her child. And we'd submit to you the evidence in this case shows that the choice she made was her child. On June the 16th of 2008, Casey left the house, pretended to leave the house, with Caylee and used the tried and true Ricardo excuse. I got to work late. We're both going to spend the night at Zanny's. An excuse she hadn't used based on the evidence since she was with Ricardo. Sounded plausible. It's something they've done before. Didn't seem strange. She used that excuse both to her father when she left and also to her mother, I believe, in a phone call later that day, or perhaps even the night before. What this tells us about her plan is this. She wasn't going to stay at Tony's with Caylee because that was not their relationship. So on that morning, Casey knew that she would not be staying at that house, and that neither would Caylee, because she knew that that night she would be in the arms of her boyfriend and that Caylee would be dead. So for June 16th, it was the same old excuse, the tried and true. I'm staying at Zanny's. I got to work late. Made perfect sense. She actually spent the night at Tony's. June 17th, well, they'd done it a couple days before, so she knew her mom would accept one more day of this spending the night at Zanny's problem. So she said, 17th, we're spending the night at Zanny's again. And Cindy accepted that. But by June 18th, Casey knew that Cindy would no longer accept that excuse. It didn't make sense that they would be staying at Zanny's 3 nights in a row. They never had done it before. It wouldn't make any sense. So Casey had to change the lie, had to add an element to explain the continued absence. So on June 18th, Casey adds the conference in Tampa wrinkle. Says, well, I've got this conference at this hotel in Tampa, so I'm going to take Caylee with me, along with Zanny, the babysitter, to this conference in Tampa. But it's not just that. She adds another element, an element that would appeal to Cindy, which is, oh, by the way, there's going to be another mother there with a child the same age. What a great time Caylee will have. You see, every time you add to the lie for a reason. Casey's very smart. Casey knows how her mother thinks. She knows she needs to add. So she adds the element of an out-of-town trip to a fun place and another child to play with. A great story. Mom will absolutely buy it. It'll keep Mom off my back for at least a couple more days. While in fact, Casey is staying with her boyfriend, Tony. And sadly, Caylee is in all likelihood in the trunk, dead and decomposing. Put out of Casey's mind as easily as she puts out the truth. Remember, on the 17th, the 18th is the day. On 17th, Casey's car is seen backed in to the driveway of the Anthony home when no one is home. I believe it's that day or the next day, the evidence showed, Casey goes to the next door neighbor and borrows a shovel. And I would submit to you that the reason to borrow a shovel under those circumstances is because she thought briefly about burying Caylee in the backyard, just like they buried their pets. Apparently that was too much work for her, so she decided instead to just throw in a swamp. Anyway, so the story on the 18th is pretty good. It buys her a couple more days. So through the 18th and the 19th, she continues to tell her mother, we're having a wonderful time. We're at this conference over in Tampa. She, on the 20th, actually extends it to add Busch Gardens. It's going to be great. We're going to have fun. Caylee's going to go to Busch Gardens with these other children. They're going to have a wonderful time, and Zanny's going to watch them while I'm at my conference. So it satisfies everything. You know, Cindy's sad that her grandchild is not with her, but she's happy that Caylee's having such a wonderful time at the theme parks. Tells Cindy that they'll be back on Saturday the 21st. 21st, she tells Cindy again that the conference is still going on, that they're still at Busch Gardens in Tampa with Zanny, Juliet Lewis, and Annabelle, the fictional people. Now, counsel in questioning has suggested that these people are somehow imaginary in the sense of being not a deliberate fabrication. I would submit to you that the fact that they are deliberate fabrication is established by the fact that while Casey is telling Cindy that she and Caylee and everybody else are at Busch Gardens, she tells another witness, Maria Kish, who you heard from, that Caylee is with the nanny at the beach. Because obviously the friend doesn't need to have the story, and she can't very well tell the friend, by the way, I'm in Tampa, because she's standing in front of her. Again, Casey's lies fit the audience and the necessities of that audience. By Sunday the 22nd, clearly they should be back from this conference by now. But on the 22nd, Cindy is told, oh, well, the conference ran late the day before. They were going to plan on coming back, but they figured they would just stay and go to the park at Busch Gardens on Sunday and have fun. And Cindy is placated by that. But they're supposed to be back on the 23rd. Casey, of course, is still at Tony's. And by this point, ladies and gentlemen, in all based upon the evidence you've heard, Caylee was already in her resting place off Suburban Drive in the process of decomposition. On the 23rd, when they're supposed to be home, Casey needs to come up with some other reason for them not to be there. At this point, Casey comes up with the story of the accident. Zanny, this imaginary person, has been involved in an imaginary automobile accident in an imaginary place and is now in an imaginary hospital. And of course, they couldn't possibly leave without her. And since Juliette Lewis is there and Annabelle is there and Caylee is having such a wonderful time, we're going to stay a few more days. So that excuse extends the stay a little bit longer. Casey continues to update her mother about the progress of Zanny's imaginary injury and extends the stay even longer. On the 24th, however, she has a problem. 24th is when she comes home and runs into her father. This is the gas can incident. So on the 24th, she's got to come up with something for why Caylee isn't with her. So she tells her mother that she came home to Orlando to get insurance papers for Zanny for the accident. Casey is smart. Casey is quick. It is absolutely amazing how nimble Caylee Anthony's mind is in the ability to come up with an appropriate and believable lie in an instant. She's impressive. But again, it allows her to extend this absence. Well, she is in fact, again, hanging out with Tony. June 25th, still in the hospital, staying there to be supportive of Zanny. June 26th, Zanny is finally released late. It's amazing how that's a theme. Everything seems to be late. Zanny's released late. So they decided just to stay at the hotel, not try to come back that night. They're going to spend one more night at the hotel. So finally, Cindy thinks Caylee is going to be home. Finally, it's been more than a week, longer, 10 days, longer than she's ever been away from her precious granddaughter. But finally, they're going to be home. The next day. The next day comes, Friday, June 27th. Well, we're back in town, but we met up with Jeff Hopkins. Jeff Hopkins is the imaginary connection to Zanny that she came up with years before. She's actually got an amazing memory. I mean, imagine being able to remember the lies you told a year ago and incorporate that into a new lie. It's really quite impressive. So now Jeff Hopkins in his town, and they're staying at the Hard Rock Hotel with him, a fun place. Again, mom will be placated by that. But of course, she tells Amy that Caylee is at the beach with a nanny. So again, we're getting contradictory lies depending on the audience. June 28th, having a great time. Still at the hotel, Jeff Hopkins, Zanny, the other children, everybody's really just having a wonderful time, Mom, so we can't come home. June 29th, gee, Mom, we're just having so much fun, we can't come home at the Hard Rock Hotel with Jeff Hopkins. Now, Jeff Hopkins becomes an interesting part of Casey's long-term strategy in this case. June 30th, she tells Cindy that Jennifer and Caylee are going to Universal Studios. They're going to have a wonderful time at Universal Studios. On July 1st, she makes a mistake. On July 1st, Cindy is actually on vacation. She makes the mistake of telling Cindy that Casey and someone named Jennifer Rosa are at Universal. Cindy actually goes to Universal, calls Casey on the phone because she wants to see her granddaughter. I'm sorry, that's July 3rd. July 3rd, we're at a character breakfast. Great thing for Caylee. She's having a wonderful time. Cindy actually tries to go and see her. She arrives at Universal Studios, calls Casey and says, I'm here. I'm ready to see my granddaughter. Oh, no, we're in Jacksonville. We're with Jeff Hopkins in Jacksonville. Now remember, Jeff Hopkins, the backstory of Jeff Hopkins is that he's a wealthy friend of hers that she has some romantic interest in, who conveniently lives out of town. Oh, we were going to be at the character breakfast, but now we're in Jacksonville with Jeff Hopkins. This is the beginning, I would submit to you, of Casey's long-term strategy for how to deal with Cindy, because she has to have one. Remember Timer 55? Timer 55 is the password that Casey created for her MySpace and Facebook accounts. And there were two references by Casey to Timer 55. The first was in one of the tape-recorded conversations with Lee Anthony you saw in jail, where she says that Timer 55 is related to Caylee. And then later, Lee testified his recollection had to be refreshed, as he frequently did, but admitted that Casey had told him that Timer 55 reflected the 55 days between June 16th and Caylee's birthday. Now, she told him the story that was some reflection of when she thought that Zanny would bring Caylee back. But we know now that's not true. We know now Zanny is a fiction. So what did it mean? What did Timer 55 actually mean? Timer 55 meant that she knew that she could only stall her mother till Caylee's birthday. Timer, 55 days. The most she could do was 55 days. And then her mother would insist on seeing Caylee. What I submit to you, the Jeff Hopkins Jacksonville story is a long-term strategy. Remember, on July 3rd and 4th is when there was the big blow-up. Cindy created a MySpace page, and she and Casey finally had a heart-to-heart. And what does Casey tell her? Casey tells her, I'm in Jacksonville with Jeff Hopkins, this man with whom I think I could have an actual relationship. A wealthy boyfriend who has a child the same age as Caylee, with whom I think I can have a long-term relationship. Mom, you've got to get used to the fact that I won't always be with you. Now, this is all made up. So she's now got herself, mother convinced, that she's in a potentially long-term relationship with a wealthy man who lives out of town. Timer 55. She's coming up with a long-term strategy, because maybe she'll marry Jeff Hopkins. Maybe they'll elope to Europe. She could extend that 55 days for months. She never had the chance. July 5th, she tells Cindy that her car is being fixed in Jacksonville, that she'll return on the 12th, that she's staying with Jeff Hopkins and his mother. July 13th, she tells Cindy that Jeff Hopkins' mother's getting married, a miraculous and fictional marriage, and they're going to stay to finish that. Well, in fact, she's just hanging out with her friends. Now, the July 3rd conversation did back Cindy off. Cindy was largely leaving her alone after that, until July 15th. On July 15th, all hell breaks loose because they got the car. I would submit to you, had they not gotten this car, I would submit to you, based on the evidence, that Casey would have continued this story at least to Caylee's birthday and probably beyond, for as long as she could. But the car made that impossible. July 15th, The car is discovered. Cindy is on a mission. Cindy is on a mission. Cindy is going to find and see her granddaughter, and she will not be denied, and that's it. Tracks down Amy Huizenga, tracks down Casey, grabs Casey, says, "You will take me to my granddaughter now." She tries to rely on the old saw. She's at Zanny's. I don't want to wake her up. She's at Zanny's. She's at Zanny's. She's at Zanny's. Despite everything that Cindy says, despite the threat of Cindy Anthony to call the police, sticks to the story. Same old saw. Zanny, 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 Zanny. Until finally, her brother, Lee Anthony, says to her, "Okay, let's play this out. I'm the police officer and you're you. Ms. Anthony, take me to your granddaughter." "No, she's sleeping." Take me to your granddaughter, your daughter. And convinces her of the reality that this story simply will not stand, cannot survive. Your lie will not succeed. And in a pattern which you will see repeated in the face of a lie that simply cannot stand, she comes up with a new lie. Yes, there's a Zanny, but Zanny kidnapped Caylee. Kidnapped Caylee 31 days ago. It's interesting that though Casey got the date wrong, in other words, remember she told the police it was June 9th, it was actually the 16th. She got the number of days right, 31 days. 31 of the 55 were gone. I haven't seen my daughter in 31 days. I've been looking for her. I've been doing my own investigation, and tells this elaborate story of how she knows Zanny because she works at Universal, and Jeff Hopkins and his son Zach and Zanny and all the other children, and tells the police this elaborate, consistent lie. And initially the police treat her as if, in fact, she's a victim of a child kidnapping. But the more they investigate her story, the more it seems to fall apart. In what can only be described as, if it weren't true, you couldn't write it this good, is the incident at Universal Studios. But it's indicative of Caylee Anthony and who she is and what she does. She maintains this story about the kidnapping, about working at Universal. She takes them to Universal. She walks with great confidence from the security gate to a building, enters the building with absolute confidence, walks to the end of a hallway, turns around, puts her hands in her pockets and says, "Okay, I don't work here." Caylee Anthony maintains her lies until they absolutely cannot be maintained anymore. When she gets to the end of that hallway, or when she gets to the end of that conversation with her brother and realizes this lie has failed me, so I must abandon it and replace it with a new one. So, in that amazing conversation with Yuri Melich and with John Allen, she admits to lying about working at Universal for reasons which are not clear, but maintains the Zanny story. "I'm lying to you about working here, but everything else I told you is true." And she maintains that lie through conversation with law enforcement. She maintains that lie through conversations with her parents and her family, which you saw through all of July and into August. But during that period of time, a problem comes up, and that is that her claim of where she dropped Caylee off has been conclusively disproven. There's just no way that's true. Her claim that she was looking for Caylee has also been conclusively disproven. There's no way it's true. Realizing that, when she is briefly released from jail on bond and stays with her family, she comes up with the new story. The kidnapping story, the forceful kidnapping story, the Blanchard Park story. Remember the testimony where she told her brother Lee when she was out in that later part of August that, in fact, yes, Zanny did kidnap Caylee, but it was by force. We met at Blanchard Park on the 16th, that they held my arms, they held me down, they took Caylee away from me because I was a bad mother. Again, faced with overwhelming evidence that the story is a lie, Casey comes up with a new one. Call it Casey 3.0, the new version. The problem with that version comes up on December the 11th of 2008. Could I have State's Exhibit 208, please? Caylee's remains are found. Caylee's remains are found within a quarter mile of the Anthony home. With her remains are found a number of items, a number of very important items. Could I have 222, please? Could I have State's Exhibits 302 and 284? There's 302, if you could find 284 for me. The first, that should be the gas can and the first problem is the tape. The tape that is found on Caylee Anthony's remains, which is contained in this box, in this bag, and you can look at. 3 pieces of duct tape, photograph we see here with a distinctive brand on it. Henkel brand duct tape, found on Caylee's body. The difficulty for Caylee 3.0 is that the same tape that was found on Caylee's body is also found on a gas can taken from her home. And you'll see from the sales exhibit you have that was put in by the defense that this tape is a fairly rare kind of tape. Hasn't been sold since 2007. And even then, there was only a couple, like 100,000 rolls of it sold. It's very unusual tape. And it's on Caylee's body, and it's on that exhibit. And in fact, in what has got to be the most bizarre part of this case, that very tape was used unknowingly by her own father to display a photograph of Caylee, that missing person poster. The tape that was used to kill Caylee Anthony was used to implore people to look for her. Could I have photograph in evidence 224? This is the bag that Caylee was found in. This is what, I guess you could say this was her coffin. This bag, could I have photograph 227? This is the tag from that very same bag. 293. This is the what's 293? This should be the laundry bag. This is the laundry bag taken from the Anthony house during a search warrant on, I believe, December the 11th of 2008. This is the mate of the bag that served as Caylee's coffin. Remember, we saw a photograph of an ad. They're sold in sets. There's a square one. There's a cylindrical one. This is the square one. The cylindrical one is in this bag. State's Exhibit 264. I'd rather not take it out because it's not in very good condition. Because that bag is Caylee's coffin. Could I have State's Exhibit, photo of State's Exhibit 233? This is the photograph of the shorts that were found with the remains of Caylee Anthony. You'll recall that from the medical examiner's testimony, it's very, very tattered from decomposition. State's Exhibit 314. This is a photograph of Caylee Anthony wearing those very same shorts. Could I have State's Exhibit 237? This is a photograph of the lettering that was found in the bag with the remains of Caylee Anthony. The last remnant of a shirt. Remember, the testimony was all that was left of the shirt was the stitching around the collar and these letters. Could I have State's Exhibit 13, please? And there's a photograph. Caylee Marie Anthony wearing the shirt in which she died. With not a stranger, Casey Anthony. Could I have 255, please, photo and evidence? And I'll need Exhibit 288. This is a photograph of the blanket that was with the remains of Caylee that was found on December the 11th of 2008. You'll notice in the middle of the photograph, you see a particular character, Winnie the Pooh with Piglet on his shoulders. I have the scissors. Exhibit 288 is the bedding that was on Caylee's bed, maintained by her grandparents for all those months she was supposed to visit. You'll see the Winnie the Pooh theme, but also you'll see the exact same figure on the bumper from Caylee Anthony's bed. This blanket was not taken from the home of some stranger, but was taken from the home George and Cindy Anthony, where Cindy and Caylee lived. The claim that some stranger abducted Caylee Anthony was no longer tenable. Just as the claim that Caylee was at Zanny's sleeping, just like the claim that she worked at Universal Studios, just like the claim that she left Caylee at Zanny's house, one by one, those claims died. And by the time Caylee's body was found, any suggestion that Caylee was kidnapped and murdered by a stranger was gone. There was no question left that Caylee Anthony died at the hands of someone in that house. When we started this trial, the defense in opening statement made some statements. I want to first, of course, remind you that what the attorneys say, what I say, what defense counsel says is not evidence in this case. The evidence that you must decide this case on is what comes from the witness stand or from these exhibits and evidence. In opening statement, defense counsel gave you a very, very detailed explanation, story of how Caylee Anthony died. With dramatic flair, he told you about Caylee Anthony being awakened in the morning by her father, screaming at her, "Where's Caylee? Where's Caylee?" About a frantic search for the child, about the grandfather bringing her up, wet from having pulled her from the pool, and laying her at Casey's feet and screaming, "This is your fault. This is your fault." The judge will instruct you on the definition of reasonable doubt. He will tell you that a reasonable doubt is not a mere possible, a speculative, imaginary, or forced doubt. Such doubt must not influence you to return a verdict of not guilty if you have an abiding conviction of guilt. The defense's opening statement has not been established by any evidence in this case.
Burden shifting. Move to strike.
Overruled.
In fact, the only evidence presented in this case is that it did not happen. George Anthony, the first witness you heard in this case, told you that it did not happen. You may not speculate. You may not imagine. And there is simply no evidence in this case to support that contention. And you must reject it. The defense's opening was not simply to create one villain. The defense was not satisfied with one. They suggested a second. They suggested someone that counsel referred to as morally bankrupt, Roy Kronk. The defense in opening suggested to you somehow, and perhaps counsel will clarify this in his closing argument, that somehow George Anthony disposed of Caylee's body and that George Anthony was somehow, actually we'll concede, George Anthony is connected to the tape. Tape's from the house. That George Anthony's connection to the tape somehow connects him to placing the tape on Caylee's body. Remember, the defense counsel said, follow the tape. But then in the same opening statement, he suggested to you that Roy Kronk somehow took the body, kept it in another location, and then returned it. And in fact, one of their witnesses, Dr. Spitz, suggested what I would submit to you is, based upon the evidence, the nonsensical proposition that someone came along, took the skull, took it home, and put tape on it. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you can't have it both ways. Either George Anthony is the person that put the tape on, which we know is not true, or Roy Kronk is the one who put the tape on. You can't do both. It's one or the other. Either somebody put the tape on that child before the child decomposed, or they didn't. The arguments made by the defense in this case, I would submit, require you to suspend your common sense, to leave in Pinellas County everything you know about how people think and act and why they do what they do. It is a trip down the rabbit hole into a bizarre world where men who love their granddaughters find them drowned and do nothing. Where men who love their granddaughters take an accident, a completely innocent act, and make it look like a murder for no reason. A world where a man who buries his pets will take the granddaughter who was the love of his life and throw her in a swamp. This is the world that the defense invites you to occupy. And a world where a guy who runs across a skull and reports it 3 times to the police and is blown off by them, takes the skull and the mandible, which is worth a lot of reward money, takes it home for 4 months, puts tape on it somehow, and then brings it back and sets it back where it was and calls the police. In any world, even the most morally bankrupt, greedy, reprehensible reprobate, if they're motivated by money and they want to report finding a child's skull that everybody in the country is looking for, and if all they're motivated by is money and the police are not listening, you walk down the street, you turn the corner, you find any one of dozens of reporters and say, "Come with me, I got a story for you." And every single one of those reporters would be in that scene right then and there, if that's what Roy Kronk had wanted. Roy Kronk saw what he saw. It's on tape. Nobody wanted to listen to him, so he gave up. 4 months later, he came back. It was still there. He reported it. It's there. You can look at the photographs of that body, and without any assistance from expert testimony, can tell that that body has been there for a very, very long time. Didn't just get set there. And that tape didn't just get put on that skull. And you know how you know that? Because the tape is decomposed just like everything else is. You've seen photographs of the tape. You've got it in evidence. That tape has been out there for a very long time. You heard testimony from the Ms. Lowe, the fiber analyst, who told you that that tape didn't even have any cotton in it. Now, we know it's the same tape as the tape in the garbage, but that tape had been out there for so long, it didn't even have cotton in it anymore, so she couldn't even tell scientifically they were the same. Everyone concedes they are the same, but that's how long it had been there. The tape did not just get out there a few days before. All the evidence says that that's impossible. Look at the facts of this case, and you will see that there is absolutely no possibility, reasonable or otherwise, that George Anthony had anything to do with disposing of this body. He is a doting grandfather who loved that child literally more than life itself. You watched him on those hours and hours of videotapes and conversations with Caylee Anthony. You saw the pain. You saw the anguish. You saw the questions that he wanted answers to because he didn't know. And you have his suicide note. January 22nd, 2009. George Anthony was ready to end his life, to be with Caylee. And that note, when you read that note, it's going to go back with you. You can read it as many times as you want. There is absolutely no way that the man that wrote that note knew anything about what really happened to his granddaughter, and that's what was killing him. He didn't know. He had nothing to do with this crime. But the evidence that Caylee did is overwhelming. Casey's car, when it was retrieved from the tow yard on July 15th of 2008, reeked of death. The first witness you heard talk about it, Simon Birch, gentleman with the English accent, manager of a tow yard, not a police officer, but a guy who for 30 years has been involved in towing cars. He also spent a year in waste management, which is 2 years in waste management, which is also, I think, important. He told you, he said, I have smelled everything that a human being can leave in a car when it gets towed. People leave their groceries in the car, park in towaway zone, their car gets towed. The groceries rot in the back. Dead bodies, 5 or 6 of them, I've had cars that had dead bodies in them. I've smelled it all. And yes, I would submit to you, he smelled rotten milk too. And he told you that when he approached that car the first time and leaned down to get the VIN number, he smelled something. And he knew what it was. And he told you that when he went back there with George Anthony and he smelled that car when the trunk was open, he said to himself, whoa, I know what that is. And Mr. Birch has no reason to lie about any of that. We could have stopped there. He was very, very persuasive, I submit to you. But we didn't. We went further. You heard from professional witnesses, crime scene technicians, who smelled it, unfortunately, on many occasions. Unforgettable, unforgettable. It's exactly what I smelled. The defendant's own father, even at the time, said, I've smelled that before, and I know what it smells like. But we didn't stop there. We got help from the one person who has studied the odor of human decomposition more extensively than anyone else, Dr. Arpad Vaz. 20 years he's spent studying the biochemistry of human decomposition. The last 10 specifically studying the odor of human decomposition. And he told you that when he opened that can, he jumped back and said, I know exactly what it is. But we're not just relying on his nose. We're relying on science too. He examined the evidence. Examined the odor. Now, what's important about what he did with the odor is that he actually took a piece of the carpet, separated from the trunk, so that the odor that he was getting had to come from the carpet itself. In other words, not some ambient odor from something that had been in the car before, but from the carpet itself. And in fact, the defense's own expert, Dr. Furton, agreed that that process would render an odor from the carpet itself. Submitted it to instrumental examination. Now, Both Dr. Voss and Dr. Furton agree that at this stage in the science, there is no signature set of chemicals that is indicative of only human decomposition. They both agree on that. All they can say, either one, is that it's consistent. And Dr. Voss, who has researched this more than anyone else, says to you, it's consistent. Could it be from other sources, other things that were not found in the trunk? Of course. But those things wouldn't smell like human decomposition. Now, you could put together a coincidental group of chemicals to account for everything. You could throw in some gasoline, maybe throw in some chloroform bleach, throw in some carbon. You could throw the chemicals together, but it wouldn't smell like human decomposition because the smell is unique. He tested the odor. He tested the carpet through 2 different instrumental examinations, one for inorganic, one for organic, and he tested the paper towels. And everything he tested came back to one specific cause, that there was a dead body in the back of Caylee Anthony's car. Now, the defense presented you Dr. Furton, who is also experienced in this area, though I would submit to you not as experienced as Dr. Voss, because Dr. Furton's main area of interest is in individual human scent. In other words, the sense that you and I give off in life as individuals. Some of his students, as a corollary, do study human decomposition. But the thing was interesting is he agreed that the odor coming from the car is, in his opinion, from decomposition. He tried to propose some alternative sources of the decomposition, such as milk or cheese. But ultimately, he had to admit that the items that were in the car, that is the garbage, wasn't sufficient. I guess it was Dr. Huntington, the bug guy, who tried to talk about, that there was maybe some salami in the salami package. And remember, I showed it to him, and it wasn't salami, it was a piece of paper. And then Dr. Furton tried to talk about the cheese and the Velveeta packages, and I showed him the Velveeta packages, and there was a tiny little bit of residue in it. And ultimately, even he agreed that what was in that garbage was not sufficient. We have exploded the myth of the garbage as the source of this odor. Even Dr. Furton admitted that no, this garbage just wasn't sufficient to give the odor that was found on these items. And in fact, the odor that was still present by the testimony of their own expert, Dr. Huntington, that he still smelled 2 years later. You all in your common life and experience have smelled common household garbage. Y'all have walked past, I'm sure y'all have walked past dumpsters. You've got your husbands or wives, somebody take out the garbage, they took a little too long. What garbage smells like is not beyond your experience. And ladies and gentlemen, when you remove a bag of garbage from a trunk, the smell goes with it. It doesn't stay in the trunk. It was there because Caylee's body had been there. But that's not the only evidence you have. You have the hair. A single hair was found in the trunk of Caylee Anthony's car with an artifact that you heard, I'm sure, more than you ever wanted to about. But an artifact which is only found in hairs attached to decomposing human bodies. And that particular expert testimony has not been rebutted by any other testimony you've heard in this case. You heard a lengthy testimony from Stephen Shaw.
Shifting.
Overruled.
You heard lengthy testimony from Stephen Shaw about a test that he did, where he literally told you, I was trying to create this artifact in a hair taken from a living person. I tried to find every method I could think of, every decomposition situation I could think of, to try and recreate this particular artifact. And he couldn't do it. No matter how hard he tried, he could not replicate it. Now, defense counsel debated with him some photographs where there was some darkening and debated whether that was banding or wasn't banding. The important thing about all of that is that when you look at the hairs that actually came from a car, from the trunk of a car or from the inside of a car, the same circumstance as this particular hair, they didn't have any markings on them at all. Nothing. No decomposition of any kind. So regardless of whether you debate whether having a hair buried in the dirt for a month can create something that looks like, so what? This hair wasn't in dirt for a month. It was in the back of a car. The point is that that hair was from a dead body. Now, how do we know that that was Caylee's body? Two ways. The first is by mitochondrial DNA. Mitochondrial DNA testing was done on the hair and also on Caylee Anthony. That mitochondrial comparison proves that that hair came from some maternal relative of Caylee Anthony, which means it had to be either from Caylee, Casey, Cindy, Lee, or Cindy's mother. Okay? Well, we know it's not Casey's because it's too long and Casey's hair is treated. So we know it's not Casey's. We know it's not Cindy's because it's the wrong color, it's not treated, and it's too long. We know it's not Lee's because it's too long. Lee's hair is short. This hair is 9 inches long. And we know it's not Cindy's mother because Cindy's mother had been in the car once, but Cindy's mother's hair is treated. And this hair is not. This hair could only come from Caylee Marie Anthony. And remember, the testimony is that the hairs actually taken from Caylee's body also had the band, just like the hair from the trunk. The only difference was the hairs from the body, the roots had actually completely decomposed, where one in the trunk had not. As hard as it is to accept, when Caylee Anthony was at Blockbuster on June 16th, walking arm in arm with her boyfriend, Tony, Caylee was in the trunk of her car in the early stages of decomposition. When Casey returned to the house on the 17th or 18th, she backed her car into the garage with the intention of burying Caylee in the backyard. She went to Brian Berner and borrowed a shovel. Based upon the dog alerts in the backyard, she in all likelihood actually took Caylee's body back to the backyard and set it down for a period of time. Was digging too much work? Perhaps. And she decided instead to toss Caylee's body in a swamp. The evidence in this case proves beyond any reasonable doubt that Caylee Anthony decided on June 16th that something had to be sacrificed, that the conflict between the life that she wanted and the life that was thrust upon her was simply irreconcilable, and something had to give. She chose to sacrifice her child to live the life that she wanted. She took her child, she took her life, and she put her in the trunk and forgot about her. After a couple of days, she couldn't forget anymore. and she disposed of her body in a swamp. These are the facts that you have heard, and these are the facts that prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Caylee Anthony is guilty of murder in the first degree, and that murder is premeditated. The defense says and will say that we can't prove how Caylee Anthony died. Let me echo the words of Dr. Jan Garavaglia, the medical examiner in this case, when she said, there is no good reason to put duct tape over the face of a child. Why would you put duct tape over the face of a child? Well, there's two reasons. One is perhaps to silence them. But then why do you need three? Remember, in this case, there wasn't one piece of duct tape placed over Caylee's face. There were three, overlapping at angles, placed over her face. Why do you need three? What does three do that one does not? One would certainly silence her, if for some reason that's what you wanted to do, as brutal as that would be. Why do you need three? You need three because your purpose is not to simply silence the child. Your purpose is to make sure the child cannot breathe. The first piece goes over the mouth, but that doesn't secure the nose. The second piece goes over the nose, but you could still have some gaps, so you have to be thorough. You have to have three. 1, 2, 3. And then the child dies. There is simply no other reason. There is no other justification. There is no common sense. There's just no reason to put duct tape over the face of a child, living or dead. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is proof beyond a reasonable doubt of how Caylee died. Because there simply is no other explanation for why you put duct tape over the nose and mouth of a child. And based upon the photographs you have seen, it is crystal clear that that's where the tape was. That the medical examiner told you, the forensic anthropologist told you, that there's no question that tape was on Caylee's face before her body decomposed, because otherwise the mandible wouldn't have been in place, and it was. You can see the photographs of the tape. I don't want to show them to you again. You can look at them in deliberation, but you can see the photographs. The duct tape is curved slightly under the jaw. There are even strands of the duct tape that go under the jaw. That tape was placed there with one singular purpose. Now, we can only hope that the chloroform was used before the tape was applied, so that Caylee went peacefully, without fear. But go she did. And she died because she could not breathe. She died because she had 3 pieces of duct tape over her nose and mouth, and she died because her mother decided that the life that she wanted was more important. This murder was premeditated, and the defendant is guilty. Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we're going to take a 15-minute recess at this time. I'm going to ask you not to discuss this matter among yourselves nor with anyone else. We'll take a 15-minute recess at this time.